Well, hello friends, welcome to Houseplant Tips and Tricks. My name is Nick and today we're going to repot some aroids. This series is sponsored by repotme.com. Get all of your indoor gardening supplies delivered to your door from one place. Repotme.com has practically anything you need for your orchids, succulents, and houseplants, including handmade potting mixes, planters, fertilizers, and much more. Aroid is another name for many of the plants that belong to the Araceae family, which includes many well-known houseplants such as monsteras, philodendrons, anthuriums, just to name a few, and these plants have grown immensely in popularity over the last couple of years, so I figured it might be kind of helpful to repot a couple of them, share a couple tips with you guys, and hopefully help you discover a couple new varieties in the process. I'm going to do my repotting today inside this portable potting bench from repotme.com, which I should have gotten a long time ago. I live in a very small apartment and it's difficult to create room to do my repotting, and it also makes quite a bit of mess, especially if you've seen me do all my repotting on my kitchen counter before. So now I can contain my mess to this space right here, and then when I'm done with it I can just slide it underneath my couch and it is out of sight, out of mind. So I have a bunch of aroids that we're going to go through today to possibly repot. I think first we might want to make some soil because we do have quite a few, and we're going to make a specialty aroid mix today using products from repotme.com. So I'm going to start off, I'm just going to dump everything right into my potting bench and we can just keep everything contained in here like I said. I'm going to start off with the Houseplant and Tropical Classic potting mix. This is the standard potting mix that I use in my home for 90% of my plants. Sometimes I amend it a little bit depending on what I'm repotting, and since we are repotting aroids today, which are kind of like semi-epiphytic houseplants in the sense that they like to grab onto things in nature and they like their soil to be a little bit more loose and well aerated, so we are going to supply them with just that. And to be honest, many aroids would probably be fine with just this mix straight out of the bag. This is a coconut coir based potting mix, so this retains water much better than peat moss based potting mixes, which is what most of the potting mixes that you're going to find at your big box store are made of. And not only that, but coconut coir is much more sustainable than peat moss, so win-win situation. Highly recommend the soil. I'm going to do a loose ratio today, so I'm just going to dump some of the soil right in our bin here. Probably more than I think I need, just because I know I have a couple of plants to repot today. So we're gonna do roughly, let's say, 2 parts soil, and then I'm gonna grab some perlite, sponge rock, pumice, any kind of nice puffed volcanic rock will do. And we're going to use roughly 1 part. We're eyeballing this as I said, so follow it as you will. And then I'm also going to grab some orchid bark. I'm using some extra fine Monterey pine bark today. You don't have to use extra fine. I just prefer using the extra fine or extra small because I prefer the consistency. Larger bark is fine. That's typically what you're going to find at the big box stores in a pinch, but I do highly recommend checking out repotme.com's selection of barks because they do primarily focus on orchid care, and they have a lot of barks to choose from. And many of these are going to be excellent when you're repotting aroids. So I'm going to do, once again, roughly 1 part of this bark right here. Get it all nice and mixed around inside our basin here. And we're ready to get started. It's really important to create a houseplant mix that caters towards the houseplants that you are working with. And many aroids tend to be high-ticket items or highly coveted plants, so I would definitely recommend going the extra mile for them. So the first one we're going to repot today is probably the most common one that we are going to repot today. This is my Syngonium, podophyllum, albovariegatum, or marble. There's a bunch of different names for this plant. So we're gonna get started by first making sure that our soil is not wet. Moist to dry soil is what you want, and when I say moist, I mean lightly moist. You don't want to go on the heavily moist side. It's really important to repot your plants when they are on the drier side, unless it's a rescue mission. Been there, done that, when the plant is like soaking wet and you got to get it out of there. Totally been there. But if you are just repotting a plant naturally, a healthy plant, and you want to do it the best that you possibly can, wait till the soil is lightly moist to dry right before, like a day or two before you will go ahead and water the plant, because you're going to have to go ahead and water it anyway when we repot it. So let's go ahead and begin by just removing this little yellow leaf here. I have some clippers from repotme.com. Just going to remove that leaf. Let's remove it from our good soil. We can get a little trash pile going. Maybe I'll grab a little terracotta pot to be our little scrap receptacle today. We can go ahead, remove the plant from the pot. We've got some nice roots on the plant, as you can see. Go ahead and just lightly loosen them You don't want to damage them or anything, but you just want to just slightly uncoil them. I used to not do this, and then when I would go ahead and repot my plant a year later, half the time it would still just be in this same little clump right here, and I would wonder why my plant hadn't grown much, and that's kind of why. I'm sure there were many other factors in that as well, but it definitely helps to just kind of tease the root ball, if you will. You don't need to remove very much soil. In fact, it's probably best that you keep some of the soil that this plant has been growing with prior, just to make it feel a little bit more at home. Let's start off by putting roughly 1 inch of soil in the bottom of our planter. See what it looks like. Looks a little bit low. We're gonna go for roughly a 1 inch lip on this. So the soil is coming down roughly 1 inch from the top of the planter on the inside. So I'm gonna go ahead and add about 1 more inch of soil, maybe like 3/4 of an inch. Nestle it in there. And that is looking much better. Now I'm using a terracotta planter with my Syngonium today. This is mostly just an aesthetic choice because I really appreciate this dark terracotta with my green and cream houseplant here. I think it's a fun little color story going on. But terracotta does suck moisture out of the soil, which will cause your soil to dry out quicker. So if you're working with a houseplant that prefers a little bit more moisture in the soil, I would recommend potting it inside perhaps a glazed ceramic or a plastic planter or anything that's not an unglazed ceramic pot, because that's the only thing that's going to wick out the moisture. There is another way that we can keep the soil a little bit more moist for those plants as well, specifically if you're working with these aroids that prefer this nice chunky mixture, but I will share that with you a little later on in this video. So that was super quick. We're gonna spank our pot. You don't have to spank your pot. I like to spank the pot to kind of level it out, and I always make sure I take my finger and I push around the perimeter of the planter. That's going to be the spot that's going to catch the most air bubbles, because that's where we're filling up the soil the most compared to the center. And that's where, if there is air bubbles, when you go ahead and water your plant after the fact, where it's just going to sink down and it's not going to look so great. So just to make sure that there's no air bubbles, you can spank your pots. Stick your finger on the perimeter, whatever works for you, both is welcome. Looks like I had a little air bubble there, so a little soil fell, but that's how we're looking. I think I'm gonna allow this Syngonium to trail. I really appreciate this one vine right here. It's got a lot of whimsy to it, so I'd like to see my plant overall look like that. But many aroids are going to really appreciate a setting where they're allowed to climb. So let's go ahead and repot a climbing houseplant. I have this Philodendron fibrosum here, which is still rather young, and I think this would be a great time to get it up on a moss pole. So I have a moss pole that I made recently. I have another video on how to make these, and I used some Repotme Sphagnum Moss to create this. We're gonna pot this up in a planter and get this attached to the pole and set it up for success to grow up this moss pole and allow its leaves to grow to its fullest potential. I've already picked out a planter for this Philodendron fibrosum. I think I'm also going to do another basalt terracotta planter, one because this is a more appropriate size planter for the project that I'm doing, but two, it also looks incredible. So we're gonna go ahead and loosen this up from inside its planter, and it's got a bunch of sphagnum moss in it, so I don't mind allowing some of the sphagnum moss into the soil. It's totally welcome. This is a great tip for if you are working with any philodendrons or aroids that prefer a more moist soil, but they still require that well aerated mix with the chunky perlite, pumice, or orchid bark, or charcoal, or whatever you're adding to the mixture. So just to help retain some moisture, you can just throw a couple strands of sphagnum in there, and that'll help retain some moisture. We have all these roots right here, some really nice long roots. I'm gonna leave this sphagnum attached, half because I don't wanna damage the roots by pulling at it, but two, because it's, like I said, welcome in the soil. It might really help with the growth of this plant. So I'm just gonna set this inside here for the moment for your viewing pleasure. I'm going to place my planter inside, and we're going to get our moss pole. Now this moss pole, it's going to take up most of the planters you can see, but I leave the bottom of the moss pole open. So soil is going to get in there and the roots are going to be allowed to freely roam in there as if it's just normal soil space. So we don't have to worry about that taking up too much room. I'm going to get this just slightly pulled towards the back, and let's get our philodendron in there before we put any soil in, just because we're going to need all the room we can get since we are working with limited space outside the moss pole. But like I said, this plant still has plenty of room for its roots to explore. Start filling up our moss pole. Once again, we're going to leave roughly a 1-inch lip. Definitely being sure to spank this one this time while holding the pole in place so that the soil can get inside that space and help anchor our pole. Pushing around the perimeter just to make sure that not only this plant is well potted, but that our moss pole is nice and stable, which it is. And then I'm going to take a piece of plant tie or Velcro or whatever you have at your disposal if you need it, and just get this to sit comfortably on the moss pole. Not only to keep it in place, but to encourage it to create some roots that will work their way inside the moss pole as this begins to climb up. So this is looking fantastic. Very young, obviously, it's got to get going, but come back and check it out in a couple months or a year or so. We might have a really nice looking philodendron fibrosum. Get this one off to the side with our Syngonium, and let's try out another one, a very different one with a very different planter. We'll start to stray away from these basalt planters now. I have this glazed bronze ceramic planter with this Aglaonema or Chinese evergreen. This is an Aglaonema picturatum? Yes, commutatum picturatum alumina. So the aluminum Chinese evergreen, let's call it, with these fun silver blue glaucous leaves, very similar to like a Cebu blue pothos or a Philodendron haustatum, the silver sword philodendron. So it's totally giving me those vibes. And I think this planter will complement it well. The bronze and the silver color look fantastic. And I think once again, we're gonna do roughly an inch lip inside this planter here. Gonna pull this out. It's got very loose soil, so I'm gonna pull it out right over top, and I'm gonna dump all of that leftover soil in. We're going to add a little scoop of soil in there. We're gonna mix it around. Just like I said, we gotta keep it at home. So we're using some of that old soil that this has been used to growing in. Add a little bit more because you can see this is not the most heavily rooted thing. It's an Aglaonema. This is a nice set of roots for an Aglaonema, particularly one that was probably propagated within the last year. So we got the soil mixture nice mixed around. Let's place our Aglaonema inside. This one's gonna be super quick. Get a nice scoop. Oop. Found our plant label hiding in the soil. Adding a nice little scoop on top of those roots. Let's get it back to level. You never wanna have your plant sitting above or below the soil line prior. You want to keep that the same. While you might be increasing the planter size and the amount of soil, you do not want the soil level to be raised or lowered. You are only going to come across issues there. Little spanks, little presses around the perimeter. And when you're planting just one plant like this, have fun with it. There's no set of rules as to where it needs to be in the planter. I just put mine in close to the center. It's not directly in the center, but close to the center because that's the aesthetic I prefer. But if you want to go a little bit more quirky with it, you can put it anywhere in the planter. It does not matter as long as the planter material size and soil consistency is appropriate. Have fun with it. So Aglaonema, commutatum picturatum alumina. Don't ask me how accurate that name is. It's also a total mouthful, but that looks amazing. I was originally thinking about putting it inside just a basalt terracotta planter because that's what I had it sitting in before. And this is a really great aesthetic choice that I made. I think we could all agree on that. Let's do this one next. It's got a lot of character. This is an Anthurium. It probably doesn't look like many of the Anthuriums that you're used to. This looks much more like a Schefflera or an umbrella tree. It looks completely different than those flowering Anthuriums or those foliage Anthuriums with the nice crystalline foliage, but still has a lot of character. And I have this planter that I think would look really good. I've been also struggling with what planter I want to put this in, but I think I just figured out earlier, a little plastic plug in it. I have this planter right here that's kind of like a fun, thin, upward taper. Is that the word? But I feel like this tall, spindly plant would look very fun in this tall planter. Kind of a little fun. I was originally thinking I should do something short and wide, but now I'm thinking tall and skinny is the way to go. So for this one, I think I'm gonna throw a little extra Sphagnum Moss into the mixture. I definitely find that my Anthuriums do best when they're working with soils that can stay a little bit more moist. So just creating a little pile of mixture over here inside my basin that includes a little extra Sphagnum Moss to keep this guy as happy as possible, especially since we are planting it inside this unglazed ceramic. So we would like to keep this moist, but we still would like our soil to stay well aerated and nice and chunky. So I'm gonna use my hand, throw a nice chunk in there, maybe we'll pull a little bit out. I think I wanna keep this pretty low inside here since it is pretty tall. And this is just coming from this little 2-inch plastic pot right here. So I think we're probably gonna do about a 2-inch lip on this, which is rather low, but I think that's what we're gonna prefer. And you can see I have this bamboo stick in here. It's completely fine. Would a moss pole be a little bit more appropriate? Yes, I would say, but you have to go the extra mile to create the moss pole in most situations. So a bamboo stick will completely suffice. It's just not going to allow those roots to explore inside, but it's still going to allow the plant to grow upright and experience more what it's used to in its natural habitat. Some stubborn roots here, but we got a really nice root ball, which makes me feel much more comfortable with this going inside this a little bit taller, deeper planter. I don't think that's going to be an issue. So let's get this nestled inside. I still think roughly 2 inches of a lip is what I'm going to prefer aesthetically, and I think this plant will perform perfectly, happily with that. Give it a spank, push down the perimeter in that order, and this one leaf, as you can see, is looking a little yellow, a little tired, but I'm not going to remove it like I did with the Syngonium because I am repotting this, and this is a more out there houseplant, so it might be a little bit more difficult than many of the other Anthuriums that we're used to. Can't speak from experience, it's been perfectly fine so far, but just because I'm repotting it, I'm gonna kind of leave this on as an outlet for it to put all of its bad energy. So if this leaf is already turning yellow, I'm just gonna leave it on. So if maybe it just needs to take out a little of its frustration from being repotted on something, it has this leaf to send all of that bad energy to, and hopefully keep the rest of the plant looking great. I'm removing a little bit of soil because I'm noticing that this bottom leaf here is a little pushed underneath the soil, and that's not where the soil level was prior. And like I said, it's really important to keep the soil level the same. But I think with that little bit removed, we are exactly where we need to be. So that looks so fun. So super fun. Let's see it with the tray. Wow. Nice tall planter with a nice tall plant. I could even get a little taller bamboo stake here because this has outgrown the stake. Super fun little Anthurium. Totally gives you the vibes of a Schefflera. If you put this right next to a Schefflera in your home, I don't think you'd really be able to tell a difference. And if your friends don't know about plants, they would probably think they are the same exact plant. So a super cool Anthurium that I don't think gets nearly the attention that it deserves. I have a little bit of soil left, plenty for one more plant to repot, so we're going to do this Philodendron. Inconcinnum is the name that it was sold to me as. Just a plain-leafed philodendron, looks like it's getting ready to climb, so we'll give it a nice bamboo stake. Nothing extraordinary that we're going to give it a nice moss pole. I think I'm going to save that for the more spectacular lead philodendrons, but this looks like it would be a fun one to just allow to climb up a bamboo skewer vertically. I think it would give a really fun vibe. I have it sitting in this terracotta planter. We're gonna put it in terracotta because I think the color's cool, but I grabbed this slightly larger terracotta planter. I think that might be a little bit more appropriate. So let's make some room. Once again, we're gonna take the plant and just remove it above the terracotta planter to allow any of its soil to fall inside. Just to keep it a little bit more at home, we'll throw in a nice scoop of our fresh soil, give it a little bit of a mix, some nice fresh nutrients in there, fresh additives, everything nice. And let's place this guy inside. I think once again, we're gonna go for that kind of 1-inch lip. I think I'm gonna get this guy as centered as possible if I'm going for that upright growing on the bamboo stake vibe. I think having this directly in the center of the planter and then having the bamboo stick going up. Do you see what I'm envisioning? Just these nice, plain, leaf-shaped leaves just growing up a nice bamboo stick, just as evenly as possible. Just a nice contrast to this more wild Anthurium over here, which I absolutely love, of course, but it's a nice juxtaposition, if you will, which is always important when it comes to indoor gardening, to have a nice wide variety of plants to give you the full experience and aesthetic. Looks like we got the perfect amount of soil made for this project. I was worried it was a little light, but now I think we are just where we need to be. So let's add this little extra bit of soil. Once again, spank our pot. We have to show it who's boss somehow. Use our finger around the perimeter. Not too tight. You don't want to pack too tight, but you just want to keep the plant in place. Like, you don't want the plant to be able to fall over. Like you could see before, it was kind of wobbling here and there. But after I've kind of gone around and just pressed slightly with my thumb around the perimeter and the base of the plant, it's now just there. It doesn't even need the bamboo stick. But the reason we're going to give it a bamboo stick that I have right here is because this is going to continue to grow, and in a couple more leaves or so, this could just fall over. So let's give it the support that it craves. Get our bamboo stick in there. I guess I could get it a little bit more centered, but we will deal with that at a later time. I'm just gonna grab a butterfly clip today just because I have it on hand and use that to keep our plant in place. All right, this is looking amazing. Super fun, just plain philodendron, but it's got a lot of character, and I think especially once it starts to climb up with the support of this bamboo stick or whatever support you have, it's going to really be allowed to grow to its fullest potential. Which, if there is any philodendrons or aroids in general out there that you know are climbing aroids and you really want them to look their best, I highly recommend allowing them to climb. You're not going to regret it in the long run when your plant has these large, beautiful, luscious leaves because you allowed it to grow the way it wants to in nature. I'm going to link all of the products that I used today from repotme.com in the description below, and if you click through those links and you make any purchases, I do get a small commission, so thank you so much in advance. And you can use code NICK to save 10% on any potting mix that you purchase from repotme.com, so added savings for you. But I think that's going to do it for today, repotting aroids. I hope you learned something, and I hope you discovered a new plant or aroid, because they are really such fun, exciting houseplants to grow. I totally understand why their popularity has increased over the last couple of years. It's very much understood. But I think that's going to do it for today's video. Thank you so much for repotme.com for sponsoring today's video. If you don't already, you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at phillyfoliage. Follow me on Patreon for even more houseplant content. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you guys in my next video. Have a great day.